Hello and welcome back to Chasing Excellence, a show about chasing what truly matters. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with Ben Bergeron. How are you, Ben?
So good, Patrick. So good.
Good to see you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We are going to dive back in. Over the last few months, we've been having a long conversation, a deep dive on programming. We've got 2 episodes already in the can. This is going to be part 3 of 3, though, of course, we may continue this. I hold the right to do a part 4 if we need to, but we've done 2 so far.
Like the Rocky movies, right? There was 3 Rocky movies until there was 9.
People like it. We're going to do a 4th. Okay, so on July 30th, we did an episode called 3 Hours a Week to Get in the Best Shape of Your Life. Part 2 of that conversation, August 13th, we did an episode called Train at Intentional Intensity, Not Maximal Intensity. I'm going to do a very quick recap of what we covered in those 2. We're just going to assume that you're caught up. We're not going to do too much going backwards. But in part 1, we did talk about a weekly framework for getting into the best shape of your life, what a weekly program needs to look like or should look like on a day-to-day basis in order to make sure we're hitting all the things we need to hit. And then in that second episode, we talked about 2 big concepts: cyclical threshold conditioning and intentional intensity. If you haven't listened to those, press pause, go back, listen to those. You'll be caught up. Where do you want to pick this conversation back up? What do you want to focus on now?
Well, I don't know if we fully rounded out the intentional intensity, so let me pull a little bit in there. Basically, it was, as the title said, not maximal intensity, but intentional levels of intensity. The title speaks to it, but maybe to create a little bit more, if this is programming 301 instead of 201 or 101. I can't remember if we talked about lifting to technical failure. I think we covered that, but there is this other aspect, and I know we touched upon lactic threshold as a place that could kind of fit into this. Let's just talk about combining that intentional intensity into the weekly framework.
Sure.
So here's what most people, when they start training, one of the major hindrances, one of the major blockers to results is how hard they work. It's one of the reasons that people go to a traditional Globo gym and stop going after a little while because they put in what they feel is the effort and they don't see the results. That's obviously a function of a lot of things, including what you choose to do and all the rest. But one of the biggest ones is, as you know, Greg Glassman has said, is intensity is the independent variable most commonly associated with favorable adaptations. And what that means in English is that the harder you work, the faster you'll see results. When you start to think about that, it's fairly obvious. If you are trying to do anything, the harder you work, the faster you'll see results, whether that's trying to learn to play guitar or learn a language. The harder you work, the faster you'll see results. Here's the big asterisk contention, maybe underline, bold, like we need a little footnote to this thing, ... That's about working hard. And as we said in the last one, it's not about everything you have every single time. So we spoke a lot about that, but what does that look like in the framework of a week? So remember that it's mechanics moving really well. Like if we're learning to play guitar, it's like, where does the guitar go on your lap? How do you hold the guitar? You're strumming with this hand. Is that with your elbow or with your wrist? When you play chords, should your thumb be around the top? It's like truly the mechanics. Then it's about consistency. Are you practicing guitar 5 or 6 days a week? Right? You're going to get there a lot faster if you're training 5 or 6 days a week than if you are trying to play guitar really hard, but you play so hard that maybe you get some blisters on your fingers. That doesn't make any sense. You train to the point where you have tipped over the edge to where now you need to take 4 or 5 days off to let your blisters heal. You would have been so much better off if you sat right at or just below that threshold and did this 5 or 6 days a week. Because it goes mechanics, consistency, then and only then intensity. So what's a framework we could layer on to explain these different levels of intensity? In the aerobic world, they are into prescribing intensities. They usually do it through either pacing, but the most common way is heart rate. And what they'll say is that there is a few different zones of training. There's also just different types of training. So people start to hear these common terms that we're about to talk about. A very low level of intensity is called zone 2 training. And There is a zone 1, but we're not far out of zone 1 right now. Zone 1 is essentially active recovery. If we were talking about heart rate, it might be like 100 to 120 beats a minute, where you're just kind of moving, but you're not really getting physiological adaptations. You're not getting fitter, faster, stronger. You're actually speeding up the recovery process of yesterday's training. If you were to do that every single day, you're not going to get a whole lot fitter, right? It's a recovery protocol. Zone 2 has some benefits to it. It's at a perceived rate of exertion of about a 3 or 4 on a scale of 0 to 10. There's some breathing involved, but it's not heavy breathing. It's the hardest that you could work while still holding a conversation. Above that is lactic threshold training. Lactic threshold training is stuff that would benefit you for, and by the way, zone 2, really good for endurance building, really good for recoverability and endurance. Lactic threshold is really good at getting you at like hour-long efforts, mostly limited by your lactic threshold. Above that is VO2 max training. VO2 max is getting attention right now, mostly through Peter Attia stuff. That is essentially what could you hold for 20 minutes. But really it's race pace effort of that 8 to 12 minutes. So like the VO2 max tests, a really common one is just like a 12-minute, how far can you run in 12 minutes, measure the meters. It's really well correlated to VO2 max. Zone 2, rate of perceived exertion, 3 or 4. Lactic threshold, rate of perceived exertion, 5 or a 6. VO2 max, 7 or an 8. When we get above that 8, we're now tipping above that 90% of your maximum heart rate, and it's really unsustainable. So, going back full circle, intensity matters. It only matters after mechanics and consistency. Here's the big thing in the Globo Gym. Intensity is the thing that people need to lean into. In our place, it's actually the thing that we need to control against. If you go to a good affiliate, it's an affiliate where people program well, work out hard, and they work out with good movement. If you're doing this in your garage, you might need to work on pushing intensity a little bit more. But that's usually, it's not the thing that I'm seeing. Like when people come into our gym, we need to modulate intensity. We try to control it because people are working out above their physical and psychological tolerances. They actually that was so hard, man, I don't know if I want to go back and do that again tomorrow. Well, even if you're not sore, that's too hard. So what's the way that we could layer this into a week? Here's a framework to create a more sustainable intensity level and training with intentional levels of intensity. 1 day a week where we are in that 9 or a 10. That's 1 day a week above VO2 max, above 90% of our heart rate. From there, VO2 max could be, a couple of days, maybe like 2 days a week. Maybe another day or 2 is lactic threshold. That's going to sound so weird to people in our space. That's a rate of perceived exertion of 5 or 6. That means that we're in that heart rate around 80%. That is not the way we've been taught how to do this. But for sustainability, Greg Glassman said it a long time ago, which is if you try and do this program as hard as you can every day, you will not sustain it. It is unsustainable. Meanwhile, he said, train 5 or 6 days a week.
Yep.
So we need to not go to maximal intensity. So how can we regulate this? If you went long and slow once a week, go for a 3, 5, or 10K run, depending on your ability. 3, 5, 10K run at a zone 2 pace, 65% of your max heart rate. There's your zone 2, once a week. From there, twice a week, do your metcons, your conditioning, at a lactic threshold pace. Rate of perceived exertion of 5 or 6. That's really chill. These movements are so powerful, you can get your heart rate jacked up so fast. That's really chill. Then another 2 or 3 days a week, try VO2. People in the endurance space are going to go, that's unsustainable. That's because you're doing your VO2 max stuff with the same thing every time. You're always doing it with running, or you're always doing it with biking. If you do it one day with push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, and the next day is rowing and kettlebell swings, it is sustainable. That's the big difference. We do it with mixed modal. So you can keep doing it because your muscles are getting a break, but your aerobic system can keep going. Your CNS does not get necessarily drained as much from the VO2 max if it's mixed modal as well. From there, then 1 day a week, we go to anaerobic power. Anaerobic power is that, let's see what we got, 9, 10, everything, and go. This is how we get up to 5, 6, or even 7 days a week of training. We say it again, you can do 7 days a week of training if we put some of those days in as what in our space we would call it active recovery. It's just lactic threshold training. A rate of perceived exertion of 5 or 6 for some of your metcons. I just want to put that in as another bullet point underneath, or maybe combining those two conversations we had in part 1 and part 2 of how can we bring intentional intensity into the weekly format.
Okay, we're going to be back to this conversation in just a couple minutes. But first, let's say thank you to a few sponsors that help us make the show possible. We're brought to you this time around by Our Place. If you want to upgrade your kitchen with healthy, stylish, and sustainable products, then go to FromOurPlace.com, use the code Excellence, and get 10% off of everything they've got on their website. Our Place is a mission-driven, female-founded brand that's leading the change in the kitchenware industry. Their products are free from PFAS and PTFE, also known as Teflon, which are harmful chemicals still used by too many other brands. Our Place offers beautifully designed kitchenware that feels like art and makes cooking at home not just easier, but healthier. They've been praised by everyone from Selena Gomez and David Beckham, and with over 75,000 5-star reviews, it is clear why they're a favorite. Whether you're a beginner or a pro in the kitchen, Our Place's multifunctional products are perfect for decluttering your space and inspiring you to cook more. We got the Wonder Oven here. It is gorgeous and it is so very useful. It's a tiny oven, goes on the countertop. It can bake, it can toast, it can air fry. We use it all of the time. So don't miss out on this opportunity to ditch forever chemicals and elevate your cooking. Go to FromOurPlace.com. Make sure you use the code Excellence and enjoy a 100-day trial with free shipping and returns. Happy cooking. We're also brought to you this time around by LMNT. If you're looking to up your hydration game, we've got something for you. Introducing LMNT Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water that delivers the same zero-sugar electrolyte formulation you already know and trust from LMNT. Get your mitts on some by going to drinkelement.com/excellence. LMNT Sparkling is perfect for anyone wanting to stay hydrated without the downsides of sugar or caffeine. Each can supports your health, turning the tide against sugar-laden and stimulant-loaded drinks. Imagine better hydration, sharper focus, and improved energy without the crash. It comes in amazing flavors like citrus salt, watermelon salt, Ben's favorite grapefruit salt, and the debut of black cherry lime. LMNT Sparkling is currently available exclusively to LMNT insiders until they figure out when they're going to launch it publicly. So if you're already an insider, you can get your hands on it right now. If you're not yet, just purchase an LMNT Insider Bundle to gain access to the LMNT Sparkling. All you've got to do to get all of that good stuff is go to drinkelement, LMNT, the letters, .com/excellence, drinkelement.com/excellence. Okay, let's jump back into this conversation. So my first question is something I've heard you say before, but maybe we can nail it on the head, which is programming can incentivize, or the kind of programming you're doing or following can incentivize this sort of behavior. Can you unpack that a little bit more and give us some examples as to what programming can look like so that it gets us to a place that 5, 6, 7 days a week is not an impossibility because we burned ourselves out on day 3 or 4?
This then becomes a question of, are we programming for a group of people, the masses, or individuals?
Okay.
So if I'm programming for a group of people, either small private training or a small group training, semi-private, or my 9:30 class, that's going to look a little bit different than if I'm programming for Patrick.
Yep.
And it's going to be very different if I'm programming and putting out programming into the world and I don't know who's using it.
Right.
The more specific answer is, if I'm programming for you, if the first thing I need to know, this is actually maybe the better way to start this conversation, I need to know how often you're training.
Okay.
Like based off your schedule and your goals and your wants and what you want to. So if you tell me, hey, I can commit today to 4 days a week. Well, if that's the case, I might not do any zone 2 because we don't need the zone 2 in that case. But you go like, no, like I really think I need to build up my endurance. I'm a former football player and power lifter. I get really smoked for anything that's over, 4 or 5 minutes. Then I'll add that in. So what we want to start with is the most impactful thing. What's the most impactful thing we can do? Mm-hmm. From there, we'd still want that hard effort a few days a week. And VO2 max is hard enough for a few days a week. So as long as we have that, then from there, we would prescribe intensities is the true answer to your question. If it's for an individual, it then becomes, is this a way, maybe I'll use myself as the avatar. I plan my week to train 7 days a week. There's many weeks that's not a viable option. So for example, this week I'm traveling to Europe. I won't be able to train the day of travel. So that's gonna be 6 days a week. There's next week I'm flying back. There's another day gone, right? So there's certain days that it just pops up, but I don't plan a rest day. I plan for 7 days and things pop up. Mm-hmm. I do my long, slow distance, my zone 2 on Sundays, Sunday run day, where I'll run somewhere between 4 and usually 7 miles. On Mondays, I don't go hard. I'm a little beat up from that long run. I know you're not supposed to get beat up from those, but they do. It's just time on my feet. If I'm doing a 7-mile run, it still zaps me a little bit, even if I do it slow. I like to use Monday as what we'll call either, you can call it what you want, take the class. This is what I do. I come into class. I still get my lift in, which is always going to be in our programming an upper body press. I just ran for an hour. I can do strict press or bench press. It's a reason we structure the program that way. And then I'll do the class, but I won't, it's going to sound weird, I won't necessarily try hard. Mm-hmm. I'll use a little bit lighter weight if it's a lot of weight stuff, or I'll go at about a 5 or a 6 on perceived exertion. Maybe it's a 1 minute max push press, 1 minute toes to bar, 1 minute bike. I'll do that, but I'll use less weight on the push press. I won't try to squeeze out every possible rep I can. I'll probably stop with 40 seconds to go, still take a break in between. I'll jump up and do a handful of toes to bar, but then come down, and instead of trying to get 18 or 22 in the minute, I might only get 15. And the bike, I'll spin, but it's a point to where I'm working and I'm sweating, not like dying. On Tuesday, I'm ready to rock and roll. Tuesdays, a lot of times, will be my big go effort. That will be like a hard one for me. And then on Wednesdays, I'll usually do something in between. And then you start to see like Thursdays, depending on how I'm feeling, Friday, depending on how I'm feeling. It's all, for me, it's this auto-regulated, athlete autonomous, meaning athlete has the freedom to be able to pick and choose when they go hard and when they don't. I can tell you right now, if there's a workout with 315 deadlifts in it, that's not going to be the workout I try to charge into, because I don't want that really hard effort with having somebody that's had 10 years removed from a back fusion. That's not the day for me. The day for me to drive and lean in really hard is a day with burpees, wall balls, biking, right? Is a day with pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, squats. It's a day for that I feel like I can lean into this one really, really hard. Is that steering away from my weaknesses? I don't think so. I think it's creating a sustainable path, because the other ones are too draining on me, and psychologically, I'm not prepared to go everything I have into those ones. And if I do, the risk reward of tipping over the edge, if I go a little bit too hard, a little bit too heavy, a little too fast on a clean and jerk, that could be bad news bears. If I go a little bit too far, a little too hard, tip over the edge a little bit on a stationary bike, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay the next day to come back and do that thing.
Yep.
So the way we do this is kind of like create the framework, but then let the athlete control when it goes. If I was working with you, Patrick, I would learn you. And I'd be like, hey, so on Mondays, we're going to do this. On Wednesdays, we're going to go this. And I would give rate of perceived exertion. And let you choose where that is. Maybe you have a heart rate monitor. I don't love that because if you're doing burpees and clean and jerks, your heart rate's going to be so much higher than if we're doing Turkish get-ups and sit-ups, right? It's going to be a totally different ballgame.
Yep. That was a good segue into the question. I've got kind of a two-part question, so answer whichever one makes sense to answer first, which is, how do you, either yourself, ourselves, or as a coach, how do you help others figure out where their rate of perceived exertion is, especially in light of what you just said, which is like, I don't really love the idea of the heart rate monitor. How do you get people to a place where they're going into a workout with that mindset of today's this kind of day, tomorrow is going to be a heavier, harder day? And the other side of that question is, what have you experienced in the gym that keeps people from modulating their intensity in the way that you just described? At the beginning of this conversation, you said, oftentimes in the gym, in the CrossFit space, we have to pull people back. And so two questions there. One, how do you teach somebody how to understand these things, how to feel it? And then what gets in the way of effectively putting into place the sort of practice that you just laid out where you do have that sort of modulation?
Okay, so the first one is, how do you get people to understand the rate of perceived exertion? First part of that is, you're never going to get it right. You're never going to nail it. You're going to be in a neighborhood. It's like, do I know if I'm at an 8 or a 7.6 or a 9.1? No. Does it matter? No. Mm-hmm. It's like you just have to be in the neighborhood. With our elite athletes, we would give them paces on the rower, right? So we're going to do, this is terrible, this is what we used to do, 3 by 2K. 3 2Ks with a 4-minute break in between. What we would want is for that to be at a certain strokes per minute and at a certain pace. But we don't say that needs to be at a 152. We say it needs to be at a 152, keep it between a 150 and a 154. I don't want to see 159. I don't want to see 155. It's not going to be perfect spot on all the time. If you start off the workout and you're like, I think this is an 8, I think this is an 8, and in round 4, you go to an 8.5 or a 9, it's not like the workout, you messed it up. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, we're not going to give everything to this workout. We're also not going to take this workout kind of as like a little back off. So that's the first, like, just take some pressure off yourself and understand it's not perfect. Next part is pacing helps a ton. Mm-hmm. So things that give you actual feedback is phenomenal. That's why most coaches don't love coaching machines because they're like, particularly the bike, they're like, I just don't know what to do. I'm just standing there watching them. I walk behind. Most coaches also coach from in front of the athlete. Terrible. What are you going to, like, there's a little bit of technique on a bike, but, I've been a cyclist for 15 years and I have a tiny bit of knowledge on cycling mechanics. Most CrossFit coaches have 0. So you coach from behind the bike so you can see the monitor. What are they holding in round 1? What are they holding in round 2? What are they holding in round 3? Now you understand this athlete. After 4, 5, 6 biking workouts, you've seen that while in the shorter ones, they can hold like 1,200 calories an hour. In the longer ones, they're like a 1,050. I don't think I've ever seen them in the 900s, and I don't think I've ever seen them in the 1,400s. One workout, you see them come in, and they're going at a 1,475. That allows you the opportunity to have a targeted conversation with them, which is like, either you're burning it down today or you're doing something that's unsustainable. So you get to learn the athletes and learn where they are. I coach the 930 class every day. I have the same 25 athletes. If you gave me someone's name in my 930 class, I can tell you what pace they bike at. Within 50 calories an hour, I know what they bike at. And if they're above or below that, I know that about them. So understanding the athlete based off of pace, and then the biggest one, the most obvious one, is its rate of perceived exertion, is what do they look like they're exerting? Some people are good fakers in both ways. They're dying, but they're actually like a duck on water, right? Up top, they're super calm. Down below, they're like, let's get out of here. Other people are the opposite. Where we've had this with some of our elite athletes, where it's basically the drowning effect, where if you put 2 water analogies, we have the duck and we have the drowner. The drowning effect is if you were to put your head underwater, and I said, hold your breath for as long as you can, almost everybody could hold it for 25 seconds. If I had you redo that, and the next time 3 or 4 seconds in, I put my palm on top of your head and pushed you down, what would happen? You'd freak out. You'd just freak out. That's what's happening to some people is they get a little bit uncomfortable, think they're dying, and they freak out. In those cases, we can do things like step tests where you slowly increase the intensity over time. Where you start off on a bike. I love the bike because there's an inverse relationship between technique and intensity. The bike has very little technique, which means somebody 300 pounds overweight can actually work hard on a bike. There's not a lot of things that we can get that 300-pound athlete to work with intensity levels because there's too much technique. Even running. Like even running for the person that's above 400 pounds is going to be hard for them to actually work the way they could on that bike. But in step test, you have them start off at a certain pace. Let's say it's wattage, and you start off at 100 watts. And you have them bike there to get nice and warm for about 5 minutes. And then every minute, every minute after that, you increase it. It depends on what you perceive them to be able to, where their conk out spot is. You bring it up 25 to 50 watts. And you see where the failure point is. This is also the way they do some VO2 max testing and other things. But that's a really good way to understand people's perceived exertion is you bring them all the way up to the top. And then you go, okay, so you conked out at 275 watts, whereas some athletes might conk out at 600 watts, right? And then from there, this is getting a little bit nuanced and a little specific, but it's what you can do on a one-on-one setting, is how fast do you return from a heart rate perspective back down to about 65% of that heart rate that you just got. If it's really quick, yes, that's a function of how fit they are. But what you're really looking for is the person that's freaking out, right? This is not the measurement for the person that just got 600 watts. This is the person that taps out at 180 watts. And where you go, okay, you were dying. And then within 25 seconds, they're like, okay, that was hard. You're like, they have a lot more left. Their heart rate was not where they were. They're physiologically, they were not freaking out. Psychologically, they were. So you can start to understand RPE, rate of perceived exertion, through a number of different ways. But again, biggest thing is you don't need to nail it. Get close. It'll change over time as people get better at tolerating higher levels of intensity.
Got it. And then the second question is, do most people get this wrong or not even know to aim to get it right simply because they've never gone through any one of those steps or any one of those practices that you just laid out? It's just, we walked into a CrossFit gym, you just work real hard and you come back again tomorrow if you can. Yeah,
people get it wrong. And it's the two ends of the spectrum that they get it wrong. The Globo gym, they don't work hard enough. In most CrossFit gyms, they work too hard. We're taught in our level 1 about all the ways to get people to work hard. Like, you got to get people to work hard. And I just don't think that's yes, but not at the expense of mechanics or consistency. The goal of the trainer is do everything you can to get them to come back tomorrow. That's how this thing goes. It would be crazy to teach someone guitar and just go like, oh, Nate, no, you got to press on the strings harder. You got to press on the strings. I want you to really go. Like someone going, my fingers are getting sore. It's like, okay, but we're going to play Stairway to Heaven 6 more times and you got to play it this fast. If you make a mistake, we're starting over. Like you don't need to incentivize intensity because then they leave. Later on that night, fingers start to get like really sensitive. They wake up the next morning with blisters. And coach is like, hey, where are you? And they're like, I can't come in. I have blisters. And coach is like pissed off. It's like, no, the coach drove them to that, as opposed to everything in the beginning, particularly in the beginning while we're trying to establish the habits. Because remember, the habits are 5 or 6 days a week.
Yep.
And that's not the expectation from day one. I'm not saying that we start with 5 or 6 days a week. That's not the expectation. The expectation is work towards 5 or 6 days a week. And if that means that we start with 1, it means we start with 1. But if starting with 1 is really hard to the point where they don't want to come back the next Monday, then we went too hard. And then from there, can we get them to 2, 3, 4, and so on? But the program is we need to do the 5 or 6 days a week because the way society is built now is we need to train, not just move. Just moving, just doing 10,000 steps is not enough. You sat at a desk for 9 hours, and the other part of the day was at the dinner table and in your car. Like, we need to go and actually really combat that. Walking, good. Walking, good. For what we're talking about, and again, just what we're talking about, we're talking this the first one, but I'll even pare this down a little bit. Can we get people? This is like a good concept of, are we fit? I'm not saying high levels of fitness, just like, but can you run under an 8-minute mile? Can you, if you're a guy, squat 225 pounds for reps? Like 2 plates, 245s. That's like a body weight and a half for most people, right? Somewhere around there. Then from there, could you also do 10 strict pull-ups? We can get everyone to be able to do that. If you're 400 pounds, I can get you to do that. And once we're there, that's awesome. We can do anything we want in life. That's such a great place to live. Now, if we want to pursue that farther and we create a hedge against sickness, can we get a 6-minute mile? Can we back squat 315? Can we do 20 strict pull-ups? That's not even what we're talking about. We just want people to be living non-sick lives. And our standard for that has been so degraded by the norms that we've lost what normal human function is. You take any hunter-gatherer and they'd be able to do that without training. Just from the amount of stuff they carry on their backs, amount of movement they do, and how much they climb trees and lift things off the ground, they would be able to do any of those things.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place to begin to wrap up. Anything else on this part 3 of getting in the best shape of our lives, building out this program, worth mentioning before we wrap this up?
Yes, for sure. That was just kind of adding on to part 2.
Are you telling me we're going to have a part 4?
There's definitely more to lean into with this.
Okay, give us just a tease of what's to come then, and we'll put it on the calendar.
We haven't yet talked about mobility.
Correct.
Flexibility, range of motion. We haven't talked about transferable. Make sure that what you're doing in the gym isn't there to get you better at the gym, but getting better at everyday life. And then we need to have some level of measurable, observable, and repeatable data. Otherwise, we're just exercising. We're not training.
Got it.
I think there's also a place to talk a little bit about warming up. So let's do that. Let's do those things.
Okay. I got them on my list. We will continue this conversation in another 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So stay tuned, folks. Cool. If you haven't yet, definitely go back to the beginning, to the first couple of those episodes we've done. We will continue to do them. Ben, thank you. This has been great. I enjoy these. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Thank you for your ratings and your reviews. If you want to get more out of Chasing Excellence, chasingexcellence.email is the way to do it. Get over there, get on the free newsletter list. Every week we send out an email with a link to a form. You can submit your questions. If you've got programming or training questions that might fit into future episodes, please let us know. I'll try to squeeze some listener questions into future iterations of this conversation. Or maybe we'll do like a question roundup, Ben. Maybe we'll just kind of, when we get through all of these conversations, maybe we'll just do a big episode with questions, because I know folks have them. Thank you in advance, chasingexcellence.email. Thank you for listening. Ben and I will be back soon for a brand new episode of Chasing Excellence.